In the 1960s, Boeing engineers were given a task that sounded almost absurd: build an aircraft twice as large as anything flying at the time. That's how the Boeing 747 was born. A machine that didn't just carry passengers, but reshaped the very economics of aviation. Its arrival lowered the cost of transcontinental travel and made mass tourism a reality. But the most interesting part is this: the 747 was never initially seen as a permanent flagship. Many believed the era of supersonic aircraft would quickly make it obsolete. And yet it was this temporary giant that defined a new architecture of global air transport, built around massive hubs and passenger flows between continents. The success of the Boeing 747 was no accident. It fit perfectly into the logic of its time. In the 1970s and 1980s, aviation revolved around major international hubs. Passengers from different cities would converge in London, New York, Frankfurt, or Tokyo, and from there, massive wide-body aircraft would carry them across oceans. This model became known as hub and spoke, and it demanded one thing above all: maximum capacity. The more people you could transport on a single flight, the lower the cost per ticket became. In that environment, the 747 was not just a large airplane, it was an economic formula. 4 engines provided the necessary range at a time when safety regulations limited what twin-engine aircraft could do. Its enormous fuselage allowed airlines to carry hundreds of passengers along with substantial cargo in the lower hold. For carriers, that meant stable revenue on the busiest routes on the planet. It was during this period that the 747 became a cultural icon. The upper deck lounge, the sense of space, the sheer scale. Even those who had seen it before were still impressed. For passengers, it wasn't just a flight, it was an event. And for airlines, it was a tool of dominance in the international market. Decades passed, and it seemed the formula worked flawlessly. Big airplanes, big hubs, big passenger flows. It was on this foundation that, in the 2000s, Airbus decided to take an even bolder step. If the 747 was a revolution, then the Airbus A380 was meant to be its culmination. The A380 was designed with a clear assumption: global megacities were growing, traffic between them was increasing, and slots at the world's largest airports were limited. If you couldn't increase the number of flights, the logical solution was to increase the size of the aircraft. 2 full passenger decks, more than 500 seats in a standard configuration, a new level of cabin quietness, and a sense of space never before seen in commercial aviation. On paper, it looked flawless. The A380 was supposed to become the aircraft of the 21st century, just as the 747 had defined the 20th. It was more technologically advanced, quieter, built with new materials, and powered by more efficient engines compared to older generations of 4-engine aircraft. Some airlines even turned it into a symbol of luxury. Onboard showers, bars, private first-class suites. But here's the question: does a bigger aircraft automatically mean better economics? The problem was that the market began changing faster than engineers had expected. New generation engines became so reliable that regulators gradually expanded the operational capabilities of twin-engine aircraft over long oceanic routes. That meant routes that once required 4 engines could now be flown with 2, with lower fuel burn and reduced maintenance costs. Aircraft like the Boeing 777 emerged, followed later by the Boeing 787 and the Airbus A380. They carried fewer passengers, but they enabled direct flights between city pairs that previously required transfers through giant hubs. Instead of gathering 500 passengers in London for a flight to Sydney, an airline could send 280 passengers directly from a smaller city, while significantly reducing financial risk. The economics of aviation gradually shifted from scale to flexibility. A large aircraft required high load factors every single day in every season. If demand dropped, the costs remained. 4 engines meant more maintenance, higher fuel expenses, and more complex logistics. For many carriers, that stopped being a winning bet. And this is where it becomes clear. The 747 was born in a world where scale was the solution to the problem. The A380 was born in a world that was already beginning to question the very idea of scale. That didn't mean immediate failure. The A380 flew, impressed, and filled cabins on key routes. But the foundation beneath that strategy was already slowly shifting. Global aviation was entering an era where flexibility mattered more than size, and the risk of empty seats became more critical than the symbolic status of operating the world's largest passenger aircraft. It was at this point that the stories of the 2 giants began to diverge. The turning point did not happen in a single day. There was no dramatic announcement or catastrophic event that instantly ended the age of giants. The change happened quietly. Inside airline financial reports. After 2008, fuel became the defining factor of profitability. Every percentage point of efficiency was measured in millions of dollars, and here, four-engine aircraft found themselves at a disadvantage. Even though the Airbus A380 was technologically advanced, it still consumed more fuel than twin-engine competitors with comparable range. At the same time, airlines noticed something else. Passengers increasingly preferred direct flights. Few wanted to spend extra hours connecting through hubs if a non-stop option was available. Aircraft like the Boeing 787 and the Airbus A350 created a new reality. They allowed airlines to launch routes between city pairs that previously lacked enough demand to fill 500 seats. And this is where the core problem emerged. For the Boeing 747 or the A380 to be profitable, they needed to be nearly full. During peak season, that worked. But in off-peak periods or during economic downturns, large aircraft became expensive risks. Airlines began calculating margins, not prestige. It turned out to be easier to fly more frequently with smaller aircraft than to bet everything on a single giant departure. Fewer seats meant less financial pressure and greater flexibility in network planning. When the world entered the crisis of 2020, it merely accelerated the inevitable. Demand collapsed, and the largest aircraft were the first to be grounded. What had symbolized strength for decades suddenly became too large for the new reality. The era of jumbo jets had not formally ended, but it was at that moment that one thing became undeniable. Scale no longer guaranteed survival. Once it became clear that the passenger era of giants was nearing its end, the destinies of the two aircraft diverged even further. The Airbus A380 was almost entirely dependent on passenger traffic. Its design did not allow for a simple or efficient conversion into a freighter. The double-deck fuselage, complex internal structure, and weight limitations made the idea of a full cargo variant economically questionable. Airbus studied such concepts, but they never materialized. The story was very different for the Boeing 747. Its distinctive hump and raised cockpit were originally designed with cargo operations in mind. The nose could open upward, allowing oversized freight to be loaded, cargo that would never fit through standard side doors. What was once seen as a compromise ultimately became its lifeline. As passenger operations declined, the 747 found new life in logistics. Global trade continued to grow, and the demand for transporting large, outsized cargo remained strong. That is why the 747-8F remained in demand long after passenger variants were gradually retired. The A380 never received that opportunity. Its production officially ended in 2021. Many aircraft were placed into storage in desert facilities or dismantled for parts. For a model that was meant to symbolize a new century, it was a painful finale. The 747 also concluded its production run in 2023, when the final aircraft was delivered. But it left the market as a legend. One that had lived for more than half a century, adapted to new realities, and left a lasting legacy in global cargo aviation. And this leads to an important question. Why did one giant get a second chance, while the other did not? The answer lies not only in size, but in structural flexibility, and in the ability to change roles within a new economic reality. When the final Boeing 747 rolled out of the factory in 2023, it wasn't just the end of a production line. It was a symbolic moment for the entire industry. The era in which size equaled strength had officially come to a close. Even earlier, in 2021, the Airbus A380 quietly exited the stage, leaving behind a question aviation had already answered in silence. The future does not belong to giants. Today, airline strategy is built differently. Instead of concentrating thousands of passengers in a handful of mega hubs, carriers increasingly open direct routes between secondary cities. Aircraft like the Boeing 787 or the Airbus A350 can fly long distances without the need to fill 500 seats every single day. They are more flexible, more efficient, and better suited to fluctuating demand. But does that mean the giants were a mistake? Not at all. The 747 made air travel mass and accessible. The A380 proved that engineering could create an almost perfect passenger space at 35,000 feet. They fulfilled their role in a specific historical moment. The world simply changed faster than aircraft development cycles. What was planned decades in advance collided with a new market logic: minimize risk, distribute traffic flows, fly more often, but with smaller aircraft. And yet, when a 747 or an A380 appears in the sky, the reaction hasn't changed. Cameras rise upward, passengers press against the windows, and even seasoned pilots look at those silhouettes with respect. Because some airplanes are more than just transportation. They were symbols of ambition. Symbols of belief in endless growth. Symbols of an era when humanity thought in continental scale. Perhaps the future of aviation belongs to efficiency and algorithms. But the story of the jumbo jets reminds us of something important. Sometimes, it is the courage to build the biggest in the world that pushes progress forward.